It started as a quiet night in a Houston apartment complex. Most residents had long since retreated behind closed doors, the glow of television screens flickering softly behind drawn curtains. But in the early hours, something strange caught the attention of the neighbors at Unit 224. Thick, black smoke billowed from the balcony, curling upward in oily waves. The stench wasn't the kind anyone could easily ignore. Sharp, acrid, heavy with the smell of something burning that had no place in any kitchen. At first, a few shrugged it off. Maybe someone was grilling late. Maybe a party was winding down with an ill-advised barbecue. But as the smoke kept pouring out, hour after hour, day and night, it became clear this wasn't just a late-night cookout gone wrong. The smell changed. It was no longer just burning meat. There was something foul, something industrial and wrong about it. A neighbor, uneasy and unsure, finally picked up the phone and dialed 911. Firefighters arrived at the scene, their trucks lighting up the night with urgent red and white flashes. By the time they forced open the door, the flames had died down. The man who opened the door, Timothy Shepard, the tenant, looked calm enough. He explained he'd been cooking for a big party. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But when the first responders stepped inside, that explanation quickly unraveled. In the bathroom, among puddles of slowly melting ice, lay unidentifiable chunks of meat. The tiles were slick. The room was damp and frigid from all the ice, but something about the scene just didn't fit. Why the effort to freeze, then burn so much material? Why the overwhelming smell of chemicals, bleach, and charred remains? The officers, unsettled but with no clear evidence of a crime yet, took note. But in that moment, nobody yet realized they were standing at the edge of a nightmare. Who would believe that beneath the cover of smoke and darkness, a far more sinister story was smoldering behind the door of apartment 224? If this was just a barbecue, why all the secrecy? And what really happened in that bathroom? The questions were only beginning. To truly understand the tragedy at the heart of this case, we have to step back from the smoke and the sirens, back to the life that was lost. Tanisha DeVonna Stewart, born July 10, 1987, just 19 years old, a college student at Texas A&M, with an ambition bigger than the small world she grew up in. Her dream? To become a civil engineer, one of the few young women in her class to take on a challenge still dominated by men. Tanisha wasn't just another name in the yearbook. She was the kind of person who turned heads and changed minds. She'd already earned nearly $40,000 in scholarships, testament to her grit, intelligence, and relentless drive. She sang the national anthem at local sports games, her voice ringing out across the bleachers. Off the field, she threw herself into community service, always showing up for others. In the Stewart family home, the walls were lined with photos, Tanisha beaming in graduation robes, hugging her mother, standing tall beside her little sister. But life hadn't always been easy. Tanisha's biological father had died from an aneurysm when she was just a child, a loss that left its own silent ache. Her mother, Gail, remarried, worked hard to hold the family together. Through it all, Tanisha grew up in a household filled with love. Her stepfather and sister became her anchor points. For friends, she was the one who listened, the one you could call late at night. Love, though, was more complicated. Tanisha's first serious relationship was with Curtis, her high school sweetheart. Later, while working a part-time job at a local pizza shop, she met Timothy Shepard, a man 8 years her senior. For a while, Timothy seemed like a mentor, someone older, wiser, maybe even protective. But as time went on, Another name surfaced. Mark, a classmate whose friendship would become a source of comfort and eventually conflict. Was it just the promise of a bright future that made Tanisha stand out? Or was it the quiet resilience she carried, despite a world that often seemed intent on making things harder for her? In the end, hers is not just the story of a victim, but of a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone who should have had her whole life ahead of her. On the surface, Tanisha Stewart's life looked almost picture-perfect, but as so often happens, the real story was unfolding in the shadows, just out of sight. The relationship between Tanisha and Timothy Shepard had started with promise. He was older, charming, and seemed to offer a sense of security. But as the months passed, things began to change. Jealousy, possessiveness, and a need for control started to creep in, growing more intense with each passing day. Timothy called Tanisha constantly, sometimes dozens of times in a single night. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing at every moment. Friends remember his temper, quick to flare, slow to cool. The jokes he made in public didn't sit right. Once, in a room full of people, Timothy threatened to kill, roast, and feed her to the dogs. Laughter followed, but the unease lingered. How much truth lies in an angry man's jokes? And if it was just a joke, why did it leave the air so heavy? Even after their relationship ended, Timothy didn't let go. He called Tanisha's roommate, showed up unexpectedly, tried to keep a grip on every part of her life. The calls continued, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes just to remind her that he was still watching. When February 2007 rolled around, just before spring break, Timothy reappeared, insisting on meeting. Tanisha, ever polite, tried to keep things civil, afraid of provoking him further. She didn't want drama. She just wanted to move on. Her friends and family saw pieces of the story, but no one understood the full picture. Tanisha didn't talk about the worst of it. Maybe she wanted to protect her loved ones, or maybe she thought she could handle it on her own. In hindsight, the warning signs were there: the controlling behavior, the threats, the suffocating jealousy. But at the time, it was easy to dismiss them as just the fallout of a messy breakup. If the people closest to Tanisha had known how far things had already gone, would the outcome have been any different? Would someone have stepped in, forced a confrontation, or called for help? These are the questions that haunt the story, because the danger was growing, and no one realized just how close it was. March 14th, 2007. The night before Beyoncé's big concert in Houston, a night Tanisha Stewart had been looking forward to for weeks. Excitement hung in the air as she made her plans, doing her hair and picking out her outfit, just like any other 19-year-old ready for a night of music and friends. She'd asked her mom, Gail, to borrow the car for the concert. That evening, she decided to stay over at her friend Lois's apartment, a choice that seemed casual at the time. Just one more sleepover in a string of many. But beneath the laughter and anticipation, a different kind of tension was brewing. Late on March 14th, into the early hours of the 15th, Tanisha quietly left Lois's apartment. Why? According to later accounts, she'd agreed to meet with Timothy Shepard. Was it an attempt to finally put their tangled relationship behind her? Or did she just want to avoid more drama? What happened next is pieced together from a handful of statements and fragments of memory. Timothy would later claim that he and Tanisha argued between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning. He said the fight started because of a phone call from Mark, Tanisha's new friend, and maybe something more. Tempers flared. Words were exchanged. According to Timothy, Tanisha stormed out, choosing to walk away into the Houston night. But after that, the trail goes cold. On March 16th, when Tanisha failed to answer her phone or show up for plans, friends began to worry. By March 17th, calls to her cell went straight to voicemail. Family and friends reached out to the police, but were told it was probably just a college student taking a break during spring vacation. As the hours stretched into days, anxiety turned to panic. Gail Stewart refused to sit by. She printed flyers, rallied friends, and started searching. The family organized a community meeting, determined to get the word out, to put pressure on anyone who might know where Tanisha was. Finally, on March 19th, Gail filed an official missing persons report. In those lost days, as hope faded, the city of Houston kept moving. But for the Stewart family, every hour was an eternity. What really happened during those early morning hours? If Timothy's story was true, why had Tanisha disappeared without a trace? And if not, what was he hiding? By the time authorities began to take the case seriously, the clock was already ticking, and crucial evidence was slipping away. As Tanisha Stewart's disappearance began to stir concern across Houston, the investigation took on a life of its own. The first leads didn't come from police interviews, but from the worried whispers of neighbors in the apartment complex. Residents near Unit 224 recalled something they couldn't shake: thick, black smoke pouring from the balcony, the kind that leaves a bitter chemical taste in the air. The smell wasn't just strange, it was disturbing. Some said it reminded them of burning tires. One neighbor even noted the fire seemed to rage for hours, fueled not just by charcoal, but by something unidentifiable. Curiosity and fear grew as neighbors reported hearing pounding noises, water running, and the harsh whir of a garbage disposal at odd hours. They watched as the tenant, Timothy Shepard, hauled bags of charcoal, burned through 2 full grills, and dragged heavy trash cans away in the dead of night. When firefighters arrived, they found a scene that was, on the surface, unremarkable. Timothy explained away the smoke as an attempt to cook for a big party, but in the bathroom, melting blocks of ice and strange pieces of meat caught their attention. Yet, with no obvious evidence of arson or injury, the firefighters left, uneasy but empty-handed. As the missing persons case escalated, police brought Timothy in for questioning. He repeated his story. He and Tanisha had argued, she'd left on foot, and that was the last he'd seen her. With no immediate evidence to prove otherwise, he was released. But suspicions lingered. A search of Timothy's apartment, done only after he signed a consent form, revealed a scene scrubbed almost too clean. The overpowering smell of bleach and ammonia stung investigators' noses. Fresh paint covered doors, cabinets, even the base of the sink. Latex gloves, a mop, and new cleaning supplies sat nearby. When detectives sprayed luminol, the truth glowed in the darkness. Bathroom tiles, shower walls, the toilet, even inside the water tank, all lit up with traces of blood. Beyond the apartment, cadaver dogs picked up the scent of decomposition near a patch of woods. Officers checked 911 logs and found a call from a neighbor reporting that same balcony fire. Meanwhile, forensic teams collected samples from drains, the kitchen, the balcony, and the trash bins. Burnt hair, bone fragments, slivers of teeth, and charred flesh, all recovered, all later confirmed by DNA to be Tanisha Stewart. As for Mark, the other man in Tanisha's life, investigators quickly cleared him. Records showed he'd left Houston for South Padre Island on March 17th. He was nowhere near Tanisha when she vanished. One by one, the evidence pointed away from every suspect except the man whose story had never quite added up. In the span of days, what began as a missing persons case was quickly turning into something far darker, a puzzle built on secrets, fire, and the silence of a night no one could forget. At this stage, the investigation was running out of time and patience. The case had captured the attention of community activists, including one man known simply as Quinnell X. Determined to get answers for the Stewart family, Quinnell approached both sides, pressing for the truth no matter how painful it might be. When Quinnell X sat down with Timothy Shepard, the pressure was palpable. What started as nervous denial soon crumbled. Timothy's hands shook, his eyes darted. Finally, he broke down and admitted what the evidence had already begun to suggest. Tanisha Stewart was not coming home. He led authorities to a trash bin, one that, by then, had already been emptied and its contents sent to a landfill. Back at the police station, Timothy's story changed. He claimed it was self-defense. He said Tanisha had come at him with a knife, and in a panic, he strangled her. But what happened next was far from a simple, heat-of-the-moment mistake. Timothy confessed to a series of cold, calculated actions meant to erase all traces of his crime. He dismembered Tanisha's body, burned her remains for days on 2 separate barbecue grills, ground what was left in the garbage disposal, and scattered the pieces in trash bins throughout the city. He bought cleaning supplies, painted over stains, and even used pliers to extract Tanisha's teeth, hoping to avoid identification through dental records. Forensic investigators methodically compared Timothy's confession to the evidence. The luminol had revealed blood everywhere it shouldn't have been. Bathroom floors, the walls, the inside of the toilet, even the water tank. DNA tests on burned hair, bone shards, and skin fragments all pointed to Tanisha. The joke Timothy once made about killing and roasting someone for the dogs was no longer a laughing matter. It was evidence. Prosecutors saw a pattern. Not just a moment of rage, but a deliberate effort to deceive everyone, from police to family to an entire community. Timothy's tale about Tanisha walking away was exposed as a calculated lie, a story meant to buy him time as he destroyed the life and body of a young woman who only wanted to move on. It's a chilling reminder. Sometimes, the truth doesn't just hide in the shadows. It's buried, burned, and broken apart by those desperate to keep it from ever seeing daylight. As the truth unraveled, the case of Tanisha Stewart moved from the realm of investigation into the solemn halls of justice. The courtroom became a new battleground, and the stakes could not have been higher. Timothy Shepard now faced the ultimate reckoning for the choices he made in the darkness of apartment 224. From the very start, Shepard's legal team, led by attorney Chip Lewis, fought to limit the damage. They argued that Timothy's confession should be thrown out, claiming it was coerced, that proper procedures hadn't been followed, and that much of the forensic evidence had been obtained unfairly. Every angle was explored, every technicality challenged. But the court was unmoved. The judge refused to exclude the confession or the mounting physical evidence. The facts, grim as they were to some, would stand before the jury. The trial officially opened on September 29, 2008. In those tense courtroom days, prosecutors painstakingly reconstructed the events after Tanisha's disappearance, focusing not just on the violence but on the extraordinary lengths Timothy went to conceal his crime. The evidence was overwhelming. The traces of blood, the remains identified by DNA, the witness testimony of community activist Quinnell X, who recounted Timothy's trembling admission that Tanisha would never be found alive. Timothy's defense tried to paint the crime as a tragic accident, an act of self-defense gone wrong, followed by panicked decisions. They urged the jury to see the act of hiding Tanisha's body as separate from the moment her life was taken. But for the jury, the horror of what had been done and the lengths Timothy went to erase it spoke volumes. The deliberate cleaning, the burning, the destruction of dental evidence, these were not the acts of a man caught in a moment of fear, but of someone determined to cover his tracks at all costs. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the verdict was unanimous: guilty of murder. The sentence, 99 years in prison, plus the maximum fine, delivered a harsh but fitting judgment. Justice, at least in the eyes of the law, had been served. But for Tanisha's family, no number of years could ever restore what had been lost. The trial was over, the verdict delivered. Yet for the Stewart family, closure remained painfully out of reach. The reality was brutal. Despite months of searching, only fragments of Tanisha's remains were ever recovered. There would be no peaceful burial, no final goodbye in the way her loved ones had hoped. For her mother Gail, the pain was compounded by a gnawing sense of injustice. How could a life so full of promise be reduced to memories, photos, and unanswered questions? In the months that followed, Gail Stewart transformed her grief into action. She became a powerful advocate against intimate partner violence, traveling to schools, churches, and community centers to share her daughter's story. Gail spoke frankly about the dangers of possessive relationships, about the subtle warning signs so often missed until it's too late. She urged other parents to talk openly with their children, to ask questions, to intervene early, to never ignore a gut feeling. Her message was simple but urgent. A single conversation could save a life. The case also stirred difficult questions within the wider Houston community. Many pointed out how slowly authorities had responded when a young black woman went missing. Would things have unfolded differently if Tanisha had come from a different background? Would there have been more urgency, more media attention, more resources brought to bear? For some, the answer was clear. The system needed to do better, to listen sooner, to care more deeply when the vulnerable cry out for help. In the end, the tragedy of Tanisha Stewart's death stands as a warning, a reminder that violence often hides behind a mask of normalcy, that jokes about control and harm can foreshadow real danger. Black smoke, in this story, wasn't just a sign of fire. It was a silent scream for help, ignored for too long. Today, Tanisha's legacy lives on, not only in the heartbreak of those who loved her, but in the urgent call for change, a call to recognize the signs, to speak up, and to never let another life slip away unnoticed. Tanisha Stewart was a bright, ambitious 19-year-old whose life was cut tragically short by someone she once trusted. Her disappearance set off a desperate search, but it was only through the persistence of her family, the outcry of her community, and the determination of investigators that the truth was finally uncovered. The details of her case, hidden in smoke, erased by fire, and revealed by science, paint a stark picture of the dangers that can lurk behind closed doors. Tanisha's story is not only about loss, but also about the power of speaking up, the importance of early intervention, and the strength of a community unwilling to let her memory fade. If you or someone you know is facing threats, control, or violence in a relationship, don't wait. Reach out for help. Listen to your instincts. Share your concerns with someone you trust. Together, we can break the cycle of silence and make sure no more lives are lost to the shadows. For more true stories like this, subscribe, share, and help us shine a light on the cases that matter.